Hello everyone and welcome to Read the World. My name is Emma and today I'm going to be talking about all 14 North Korean memoirs that I have read. Some of them aren't quite memoirs, but kind of are, basically are. I'll explain all of them as I go along. I would like to preface this by saying that I do know more about North Korea and people who have left North Korea than the average person. I majored in Asian studies for my bachelor's degree. I did my senior project studying North Korean memoirs. All of the books that I read for that project are on this list today, but I've also read even more than that. I then went to graduate school in South Korea studying international peace and security, and my thesis paper was about early North Korean missile testing. I also have done an internship that had to do with the border between North and South Korea. I've actually written multiple articles about the Kim Jong-un regime. I've read a lot about North Korea. However, that being said, I still wouldn't call myself an expert. I'm still very young. I have not yet begun my career. There are so many people out there who have studied North Korea even more in depth than I have and understand the conditions that people in North Korea live under now, have lived under in the past. All of this is my opinion, and I would definitely invite you to read whatever books I mentioned that catch your attention. I'm also probably going to link some information in the description if you want further reading about North Korean refugees and their stories, just to prepare yourself, because it's a very complex issue. I'm going to include an article about the fact that North Koreans' accounts are sometimes found to be untruthful and why that is. And I fully acknowledge that some of these books may have fabricated elements in them, but having read so many of them, I feel like I've gotten a good overall picture of what the typical North Korean experience is like, but more just in the time period that most of these take place. Because also most of these memoirs are about people's experiences in like the 90s and early 2000s, which is very different from how North Korea is today. There's now different leadership, different policies. North Korea is constantly shifting and changing, and there's always so much to learn, which is one of the reasons why I love learning about it. There's always something new. There's always something different to dig up and to discover. Does that make it seem like I'm entertained by the suffering of those living in poverty and starvation under an authoritarian regime? I think it's important to learn about various governments and kinds of lives and to understand how those conditions come about. Hopefully this will be just an interesting way for you to start that journey if you're interested in learning more about other cultures, especially those living under a very different system than people in the West, like myself. Also, a book that is not a memoir, but that mentions a lot of stories of people from North Korea and kind of contextualizes it with a lot of other background information about the history of North Korea. I would highly recommend the book Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick. It's more a nonfiction book about the conditions in North Korea in the 90s, and I think it's just a really good overview of what things were like there at that time and gives a more holistic view over like lots of different kinds of experiences rather than just one person's experience. I think that both of those kinds of books are very valuable, but I think Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick is just a really fantastic place to start with learning about North Korean politics, culture, and history. The first book that got me into learning about North Korea and the experience of North Koreans who have left is Escape from Camp 14 by Blaine Harden. This is, it's not quite a biography because it's not about the entirety of someone's life. It's like a memoir that was written on someone's behalf, kind of. It's a nonfiction book, so it is about the man Shin Dong-hyuk, who was born in a prison camp in North Korea and escaped, and what all that was like for him. I will say this is a high-profile case of untruthfulness, I suppose, because it did turn out that he changed a lot of the details for this telling of his experiences. So Blaine Harden just extensively interviewed Shin Dong-hyuk and then wrote up his experiences in a narrative. It later came out that Shin Dong-hyuk had altered a lot of those details, including which camp he was in. It was not even Camp 14. I will link that article below. In this particular case, I think about these sort of things on a very case-by-case basis. It really just seems to be details. Some of the details are a little more significant that he changed, but it does seem like the majority of what he said was true. He just altered some details. From his perspective, he just didn't think it was that important what the details were, and that like the most important thing was what happened overall. And I can see that. It's just a good thing to keep in mind. It is very upsetting, a lot of things that happened to him. It's also just a very unique, fascinating story. There's really no other story like this out there right now. Just all of the horrific things that happened to him and all the things he had to do in order to get out of it, to be free. I found it extremely compelling, so compelling that it took over my entire life. And I've, ever since reading this book, I've just continued reading books about North Korea and studying it in all of school. So that's how that's gone for me. So I would really recommend this one, just keeping in mind that not all of the details are exactly what it says in the book. And I have come to terms with that. I'm okay with that. I've also read The Girl with Seven Names by Hyeonseo Lee and David John. This one is really interesting because it's just not typical of a North Korean who left around 25-ish years ago, 25, 30 years ago, because she was in a fairly privileged life and kind of like went over the border from North Korea into China kind of on a dare a little bit and just like got stuck there on accident. Like, it's, and like it is dangerous, that like the way that she has to live, but it's nothing particularly horrific. It's more just an intriguing story, but just really, really not typical. I thought it was interesting to read. I personally, knowing a lot about the experiences of North Korean people, found it particularly fascinating that her story was so different than everyone else's who like left out of like desperation or survival. But if you don't know have any of that background, then I don't know, I don't think it would hit you as hard. I thought it was a really interesting story though. I appreciated it. So I have talked a lot about untruthfulness and how I was able to look past that with Escape from Camp 14. But one book that I am not going to talk about in this video because I do not feel like I have the expertise to speak on it, and I also don't want to platform this person, is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park and Marianne Ballers. In this case, when it comes to untruthfulness, I will link some articles in the description and allow you to come to your own conclusions. Another book that I read is The Aquariums of Pyongyang by Kang, Chol-Hwan, and Pierre Rigouleau? Rigouleau, I think. I'm sorry. Translated by Yair Rayner. This one I highly, highly, highly recommend. I think that this is a fantastic example of what life has been like for people in North Korea in the past. This one is also really interesting because it explores the relationship between North Korea and Japan. The main author's family was very wealthy and privileged because of their connections to Japan, but then all of them were sent to a prison camp and then left, and then he escaped. And I just think that it's not too long, it's quite approachable, but just covers so many different complex factors in the lives of North Koreans and in North Korean history, and that I thought the writing was very compelling as well. I think the co-author did a really great job helping Kang Chol-Hwan out with this one. I also read Long Road Home by Yong Kim, translated by Suk-Young Kim. This one is so fascinating. It is such a different story. Like, it still involves a lot of those factors, falling from privilege, being sent to a camp and all these things, but it has this like really uncommon factor of how the author was adopted by a privileged family in North Korea, and it turns out that his birth family belonged to like basically like the criminal class, like the lowest class of North Korea. And when that is found out, when he's trying to get promoted in the North Korean government, he is thrown into a prison camp even though he has done absolutely nothing. It was his birth family that he never knew that like did all these things. It was just it's such a twisty turny series of events. I believe like there's no co-author listed for this as far as I know, and so I think he wrote it on his own. And you can really see his like education, like this is about his like educated background, his privileged background, because I found his narration to just be so compelling. It was just such a bizarre, fascinating story, the way that everything happened to him. This one really stuck with me. I also read Stars Between the Sun and Moon by Lucia, Jang, and Susan McClelland. This one is a pretty typical story of a North Korean woman who leaves North Korea for survival. I think a lot of North Korean memoirs and books that get a lot of attention are often by male authors, when it's often North Korean women who endured more abuse and are often trafficked, go through really horrible things once they leave North Korea. Considering that perspective is really important. I didn't find the narration style to be overly special. There are some parts of it that I found a little clunky with the way it was trying to incorporate like Korean words and phrases, but I think that Lucia's story itself is really heartfelt and important to consider. I read This Is Paradise by Hyok, Kang, and Philippe Grangero. All these French people. Translated by Sean Whiteside. This one's interesting because it's about a man who left North Korea when he was very, very young. Those reflections on his experiences as a child from the perspective of someone who has grown up abroad, lives abroad now, was very unique. I did love the style of just like recalling childhood memories. I thought that was a very interesting, a little bit softer way of processing the events of the place and time. I also read Dear Leader by Jin-Sung, translated by Shirley Lee. The man who wrote this one worked pretty high up in the North Korean government, and then I believe because of a mistake that he made, just decided like, oh, I'm gonna get in huge trouble for this, so I might as well just flee the country, which when you're in North Korea is a much bigger task. And so Long Road Home also involves a man who worked pretty high up in the North Korean government, but with Dear Leader, there's more focus on like the working in the government part, while Long Road Home has more focus on like the prison camp and escape part. If you want more insight into just what it's like to work on the inside of that system, I thought this was very interesting. And as far as I remember, I'm pretty sure this one is a bit less horrific than a lot of the other ones, just because he's in this place of privilege and just like gets out. So that was a pretty unique perspective. I also read 1,000 Miles to Freedom by Eunsun Kim and Sebastian Faletti, translated by David Tien. This is also, I would say, is comparable to Stars Between the Sun and Moon. I think I liked this one a little bit more though. I enjoyed the narrative style. I would really, really, really recommend this one if you want an in-depth view into the typical underprivileged person in North Korea's experience leaving. I would recommend this one. It's very sad. It's very difficult to read. Author went through really horrific things. It's quite short. I found it very simple, concise, and effective. I just think this is an important story to know. I also read A River in Darkness by Masaji Ishikawa, translated by Martin Brown and Risa Kobayashi. This one's quite unique because it's the only North Korean memoir I've ever read where the author escapes to Japan rather than South Korea, because he was someone of Korean descent who grew up in Japan and then went back to North Korea because his family was associated with the Communist Party. I think this is similar to the experience of the author of the Aquariums of Pyongyang. And so since he already has this deep connection to Japan, once he escapes to North Korea, he like secretly goes to the Japanese embassy and escapes to Japan that way. I think the ending's really horrible though, like where like he escapes to Japan, he's like not really able to talk about his story because the Japanese government is like, we'll get into so much trouble with the Chinese government if they find out that like we helped you escape from China, and he can't contact his family that much, I think, and he's just living in poverty and really lonely, and it's all really horrible. It didn't really explain how he ended up writing this book, and it was translated from Japanese, so that was a very unique perspective. But I just remember the ending was devastating of him being like, I left North Korea and I am still miserable. Like, oh, okay, dang. That's so rough, because usually these books have like a pretty hopeful ending of like, okay, like I had this really horrific experience and like escaping and like doing all these things, but now I've started on this new life in South Korea or America or England or wherever, and I'm working hard to like make a better life for me and my family. Except that this does make me think of the fact that things are still obviously super hard for North Koreans once they like move to another country. The culture shock is really intense, and there's a lot of prejudice against them. And I think I've seen a little bit of discussion about that sort of thing in these kinds of memoirs, but not so much. I don't think that the typical North Korean author wants South Koreans to think that they are ungrateful and don't want to have that kind of reputation, but moving out of North Korea is really, really hard. And I have read about refugees talking about like it's so difficult, they kind of wish they hadn't left. Like they miss the system that they knew and understood. And so this man is just so honest about that, of like, maybe this was a mistake, maybe I shouldn't have left. So I found that deeply compelling. It made a big impression on me, and I still remember just what it was like to read that. Oh, so devastating. And then I also read Every Falling Star by Sungju Lee and Susan McClelland. This one is about a boy, well, I guess it's written by a man who, when he was a boy, in the 90s, during the arduous march, the famine that swept through North Korea that killed probably 1 million people, he was a street child who got by banding together with street gangs and stealing and digging through garbage and things like that. And there's lots of mentionings of those kinds of children. They're called gotjebi. When you're reading about the arduous march, when you're reading about that period in North Korea in the 90s, they'll often mention all of the orphaned or abandoned children just feral in the streets fending for themselves. And this is the only book I have read completely dedicated to the experience of being a gotjebi, of being that child. Hopeful ending, because he gets out and is reunited with some of his family, which is great. But just, children suffering. Oh, it's horrible. It's so horrible. But, with light at the end of the tunnel, I guess. And there are still scenes from this book that really stand out to me in my mind, and the things that he went through and had to do to survive. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. Susan McClelland also helped write Stars Between the Sun and Moon, which I was a little bit less impressed by writing-wise. Still a really important story, but writing-wise, just not that impressed. Every Falling Star. Oh, there's a star in both titles. Interesting. I recall very fondly when it comes to the writing. So, who knows? I also read Eyes of the Tailless Animals by Soon-ok Lee, translated by Cheong Chae and Pan-suk Lee. This one is super weird. It's basically Christian propaganda. I ordered it online somewhere when I was trying to find more material for my senior project in my undergrad, where I was just like, I'm just trying to find as many North Korean memoirs as I can. I ordered this one. It's very obscure, from a super small press, a small Christian press, and it's just all about this North Korean woman who suffered in North Korea and then left and found Jesus. There's some interesting insight, just intellectually, academically, to study, but just because it is so biased towards clearly trying to talk about how Jesus helped heal her, which if that is true, I love that. I'm so glad that she I'm so glad that she was able to find peace through whatever means that she had. That's great. But because it has that heavy bias towards it, I'm just not sure how much of it is accurate, and how much of it is either exaggerated for effect or for her message or whatever. So if you're a super mega nerd about North Korea like me, then you could be interested in seeing what that kind of story is like. But overall, wouldn't super recommend it, just because I'm not quite sure what's going on here. She's just using it as a missionary tool of look, Jesus is so good that he helped me, a North Korean, which is beautiful. Love that. Not at the top of my list though. These last two are ones that I read more recently. I was like, oh my gosh, I own these books. I own these books by North Korean authors, and I want to do a video about this, and so I need to read these books that I own so that I can talk about them. So these are quite fresh in my mind. I read The Tears of My Soul by Kim Hyun-hee. This one, I just like to say, terrorism and murder is bad, and I do not promote suffering and violence. And this book is about suffering and violence that happened in real life, but I found it extremely entertaining to read about, and I'm so sorry about that. How do you talk about that? Of oh, here's a person that did and experienced horrific things. It was awesome. How do you? I don't know, man. I thought this book was so interesting. It's about this woman who in the 1980s helped blow up a passenger plane that killed 130 people. It was horrible, 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 horrible. That's so awful. Never should have happened. She never should have done it. Obviously, but just the story of how she was trained by the North Korean government as a secret agent, and all the things she had to do, and then what she went, what happened when she got caught and ended up having her entire worldview crumble as she realized that the North Korean government had been lying to her, and so she helps South Korean government. It was so good. It was such an exciting, compelling story. But I feel weird describing it that way, because it is about the true story of someone who blew up a ton of people, and that's awful. I don't advocate for that, but I was on the edge of my seat this entire book. I loved it. I feel weird. I don't love what she did. I just love how she wrote about it. I was enthralled the entire time. And she is so repentant. It was so emotional. Like, she really writes so much about how awful she feels when she realizes what she's like, the impact, like when she like truly like realizes the impact of what she's done. And the proceeds for the book all went to the families of the victims in the plane explosion. I believe her. I believe that she's completely repentant, that she feels horrible. This book is, I got it. I got like a beat up used copy from like a used book seller on Amazon years ago. I don't use Amazon anymore, don't worry. So I'm guessing it's out of print. But it's a real life secret agent story with a redemption arc. This one really has it all. Yeah. How do you reconcile those things of like, wow, this is such a great story about a real life horrific thing that happened? So that's why I'm trying to just present both those things. This is awful, but also I just loved reading about it. I really feel like I got to know her and like her journey and her perspective. Kim Hyun-hee, I admire her. She should not have blown up that plane, but I love the way she wrote about it. And I truly believe that the way she currently is now would never have done that. But she was trained to believe that what she was doing was the right thing. She thought that she had a greater purpose. That's so interesting. Yeah. Whew. That one, I'm glad I own it. I'd read it again. And then finally, the most recent North Korean memoir that I read was The Hard Road Out by Ji-Hyun Park and Se-Lin Chai, with translation work by Sarah Baldwin. This one has the unique perspective of being by a woman who went on to settle in the UK and to become involved in British politics. She doesn't talk about that too much. She talks about it a little bit at the end. Other than that, I would say her story is quite typical of someone who leaves North Korea for survival and has to endure a lot of really difficult, horrible things. The things that the aspect of this book that I found the most moving was that it's written mostly by Se-Lin Chai, and then like kind of interspersed throughout the narrative, she'll pull back out to her interviewing Ji-Hyun Park, and then like sitting in a cafe and getting to know each other, and all of the things that they found that they had in common as a North Korean and a South Korean, and all of the reflection and discussion about that. I really enjoyed having that extra element of reflection and examination, rather than just straight narrative the entire time. I thought that was really interesting. I will say it's called Hard Road Out, and it talks a lot about how difficult things were for her and her family during the famine, and them having to leave, and the horrific things that she has to endure in China. But then on like the last page, it's and then like it like very, very, very in a very condensed way is like, and then I tried to escape by going through Mongolia. And then on like the last page, it's like, but I didn't make it. I didn't make it by that time that I tried to escape. And so I went back and lived in China for a while longer and then escaped again later. And just doesn't talk about what any of that, like what happened in between that first attempt and that second attempt, then the second successful attempt, and what it was like at all. Like you don't actually, she doesn't talk about the road out. It talks about how hard it was. It talks about the road. It doesn't talk much about getting out on that road. So I just thought that was, and then it didn't really explain like this was really difficult and personal, so I don't want to go too much into detail. It just kind of is like, and then I got out, the end. And obviously it is her choice which she decides to reveal about herself. I was just a little confused. I would have liked a little bit more explanation about why she didn't talk more about that, especially since that was the title of the book. It didn't really talk about getting out. So yes, I think this one is just an interesting variation on the violence committed against North Korean women as they try to find a better life for themselves. Let me know if any of these interested you, if you've read any of these and you agree or disagree with my assessment, any of the other things that I commented on about reporting truth, about other elements in this kind of narrative and how they contribute to our understanding of these stories. There's just a lot to touch on here that I feel unqualified to comment on, and yet here I am. Again, I'd just like to say I'm no expert, and as far as I know, everything that I've said today is wrong. So please just let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.